Good day. Welcome to the 49th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. And today I will talk about um, a response to a Marxist critique of decolonial theory from a number of Marxists. Vijay Prashad is the leading Marxist in this regard. And he wrote a few articles and also one with Mikaela, Nhondo, Erskog, uh, and and then there's another guy, Kevin Ochieng Okoth, who wrote a book and an article criticizing decolonial theory. So I wrote a response to it, and the response could be found on my website, sandohira.com. If you go to the menu item articles, you will find a response to this critique. And I discussed them in extenso, and this PowerPoint is a summary of it. But let me go through the sources of their critique. Vijay Prashad started in July 10, 2022 with an article on Marxism and decolonization in Monthly Review Online. And then in September 2022, he published 10 theses, an article 10 theses on Marxism and decolonization. I wrote a response to that. You'll find it also on my website, which is a decolonial critique of the 10 theses. And then this year, he produced a YouTube video, Decolonizing via Marxist Lens. So he's quite active in this regard. Then he wrote an article with Mikaela and Nhondo, Erskog, in Monthly Review, where they discuss the work of Kevin Ochieng Okoth on Marxism and decoloniality. I'll come back to Kevin later, but they discuss Kevin and they put out their own ideas and their own critique on it. Kevin published an article in 2021, September 22, in a journal that he's editing, Salvage, Biannual Journal of Revolutionary Arts and Letters, and there he put the first article on decolonization and its discontent, rethinking the cycle of national liberation. And then 2 years later, he published a book with Falso, Red Africa Reclaiming Revolutionary Black Politics. So go to the sources, read their stuff, listen to the YouTube video of Vijay so that you can get familiar with their critique. So I go through all the sources in the article, cite, quote their critique extensively, which I won't do here, but I'll give a summary of the critique. One is decolonial theory neglects the conditions of social production and the political economy that structures everyday life and behavior. Meaning that decolonial theory is about culture and not about economics and not about, the factors that determine life and thinking. Second point, decolonial theory is embedded in European philosophy despite its claim of being a critique of Eurocentrism, meaning that the decolonial theorists, they cite a lot of European philosophers in their work, and because they talk about modernity, and the philosophers of modernity is where they go back to. Third point is decolonial theory doesn't acknowledge the importance of class and class struggle. That is the Marxist position. Decolonial theory is not about changing the world. It's just a critique and not a practical philosophy. Fifth, this socialism should be the end goal of the struggle of humankind, and Marxism is the best alternative for African experiments with socialism. I'll come back to those somewhat later. And decolonial theory regards Marxism as a Eurocentric theoretical framework, which is incorrect. These are the main items of their critique. So let's go to this critique point by point. Now, there's a problem for them, which I acknowledged. I must say that I appreciate their critique. I think it's a great thing that Marxists get in dialogue with decolonial theorists, which is another philosophy of liberation. So I do welcome their critique. And I understand their problem, because if I offer a decolonial critique of Marxism, I go to Marx and Engels as the sources for my critique. If you critique decolonial theory, what are the sources? And Okoth, articulates it. Says, what do we mean when we speak about decolonization? Despite an endless stream of op-eds, essays, features, panels, and books on the subjects, there seems to be little agreement on what exactly we want to achieve by decolonizing something. Confusion about the term is constitutive and contemporary conversation. Constitutive of contemporary conversation. So he has a point there. You can't say, oh, this is the foundational text, and that's why you should criticize those texts. They take basically the works of Walter Mignolo and Annibal Giano and take that as the representative, which is fine. They have the right. You don't expect somebody in their critique that they go through the whole panorama of contributions. They could say, look, I regard this as the foundations, and I take my critique there. It's fine. You could do that. Now, I have offered a critique of decoloniality. Decoloniality is very young, only a few decades. Marxism is almost 200 years old. Liberalism even older, 300 years. But I acknowledge the weaknesses of decoloniality, and I've written an extensive critique of decoloniality. And decoloniality is basically the theoretical framework that looks at modernity and the other side of modernity, which is colonialism and barbarism. But I argue that that framework is a concept. It's not a comprehensive framework, because they don't deal with decolonial economic or political theory. So Prashad is right on that when he points out to this weakness. Where is the decolonial economic theory or political theory? So it's all about philosophy, epistemology, most of them, here and there contributions, but it's not comprehensive. It is not coherent, because you will find contributions that contradict each other. Some decolonial thinkers will go to Marxism as a source of inspiration on what is finally going to be done. You see that in Enrique Dussels' book on the unknown Marxists, the unknown Marx, and then you have other decolonial theorists who are liberal, more or less going to liberalism. So it's not coherent. The other point is it's not integral. It's not clear what the foundational category for decolonial theory is from which you reconstruct a whole new system, knowledge system of decolonial theory. Now, liberalism is a coherent, comprehensive, and integral framework, and its basis is individualism. Marxism is also comprehensive, coherent, and integral. And integral is it has a base, which is class struggle, class analysis. That's not there in decoloniality. So the critique of Prashad that the lack of class as a basis of analysis is only valid when you are a Marxist. But if you're not a Marxist, there's nothing to say that you should take class as a basis of analysis. Then you're a Marxist. But what is it if you are decolonial? Now, I argue that it's the concept of civilization and mental slavery, the colonization of the mind, and from there you reconstruct knowledge. Decoloniality, another point of my critique, is that it is a critique indeed. But in order to survive, it needs to move to the stage in which it provides practical answers to practical problems. The lack of practical solutions for current world problems is a big defect in decoloniality. And in this case, Prashad is right. And then my last point of critique of decoloniality is that it doesn't provide organizational concept for social struggle. How do we organize for social struggle? Marxism prescribes building political party to lead socialist revolution, but what does decoloniality suggest? So again, there are valid critiques that you can give on decoloniality, not only from a Marxist perspective, but also from a DTM perspective. Now, what is DTM? It is a critique of Eurocentric knowledge production. It is also the development of an alternative, comprehensive, coherent, and integral knowledge production. And then it is about how to translate this new knowledge into viable practical policies to build a new pluriversal world civilization. So I argue it's an alternative philosophy of liberation different from Marxism. So let's answer their critique. The neglect, but from a DTM perspective, the neglect of the conditions of social production. It's true, decoloniality is looking only at culture, but DTM not. You know, DTM looks at civilization as a collection of economic, political, social, and cultural institutions, and we analyze these institutions as an interconnected whole. It's not only about culture. And then the second critique, decolonial theory is embedded in European philosophy. That's right for decolonialism, but not for DTM, because DTM is a critique of the European Enlightenment and questions the basic propositions from the standpoint of the experience of civilizations from the Global South. When we critique the European Enlightenment, the critique is based that civilizations in the Global South have produced in various disciplines, from philosophy to economic theory to mathematics to natural sciences, there were already foundations of knowledge in the Global South that is the basis of the critique of the European Enlightenment. For example, Mohammed Bakir al-Sadr, Iraqi scholar, critique Marx and Adam Smith from an Islamic point of view, arguing that economic theory is about ethics and not, as they argue, about scientific laws. So yeah, DTM draws from those civilizations. But again, I find it curious that Marxists offer this critique because Marxism obviously is embedded in the European Enlightenment. The third critique is that the importance of class and class struggle is not acknowledged. Well, for Marxists, that is important, but if you have a different framework of analysis, which DTM has, in that framework of analysis, I argue that the Marxist concept of class is insufficient to understand social relation. So the demand that social theory should be based on class and class struggle only holds when you're a Marxist. But if you're not Marxist, that is not a critique, you don't belong to us. That's not a critique, that's just a statement of conviction. And the fourth, decolonial theory is not about changing the world, but that doesn't hold for DTM, because DTM formulates a vision for the future, the transition from the current colonial world civilization to a new pluriversal world civilization. And the fifth critique is socialism should be end goal of the struggle of humankind. But if you are not a Marxist, this critique obviously doesn't hold. In other philosophy of liberation, there are other models of civilization and societies that are as valid as socialism. The saying that we should all be socialists is not a critique, it's just a statement of your own importance and what you think is right. It's not a scientific statement. And then the critique that Marxism is Eurocentric, they say it's incorrect, but Marxism is Eurocentric. It originated from the European Enlightenment, so obviously it has Eurocentric roots. The only way to claim that it is not Eurocentric if you assert that it is universal. Now, that is exactly an important characteristic of Eurocentrism, the claim of universality of knowledge that originated in Europe. From a DTM perspective, the Marxist critique of decolonial theory is invalid. Now, I've offered in in the book Decolonizing the Mind, I've offered a critique not just of the European Enlightenment, but of liberalism and Marxism. And I pose an alternative philosophy of liberation based on contribution from the different civilizations. For Marxists like Prashad, they have only one valid philosophy of liberation, Marxism. They don't acknowledge that there are other philosophies of liberation. For example, Islamic philosophy of liberation. It's not in the narrative. And in my critique of the Enlightenment, liberalism, and Marxism, I covered a broad spectrum: philosophy, world history, economic theory, social theory, political theory, cultural theory, mathematics, biology, physics, linguistics is there. And the critique should go into the development of alternative textbooks for the disciplines. So, Kevin Okoth, wrote this book on Red Africa, where basically he says, let's go back to the national liberation movements. And there were Marxists in the national liberation movement, obviously the South African Communist Party in South Africa, but Amilcar Cabral in the Portuguese colonies of in Africa. And there were Marxists, Walter Rodney, and they, Szilard James, they made great contribution, no doubt about that. When I became a Marxist, these were idols in studying their work. But now, Marxism, and that is why I moved away from Marxism, have to answer practical problems of today. Take economics. We see the experience in Russia and China. Are you still there as a Marxist saying that you want all means of production to be concentrated in the hand of the state? Eventually, you could say, no, not now, now we could use markets. But at the end of the day, do you want to have central planning? Say it, because that's the logical consequence of the Marxist economic theory, especially the labor theory of value, that says that exploitation is lies in the fact that means of production are concentrated in the hands of the capitalists. The workers are forced to sell their power through the market. So that's why you need to abolish the market and you need to nationalize all the means of production. Given the experience now of the last century, are you still thinking that that's the way to go? Say it, because I don't think many people will understand the evaluation of the Soviet and Chinese experience until now. Take another thing. In Venezuela, there's been a revolution going on for a few decades now, based on parliamentary democracy and a multi-party system. That is not in the Marxist theory, and yet they call themselves socialists. Should Marxists say, well, Venezuela is fine for now, but ultimately you need to abolish parliamentary democracy and institute one-party rule? Would you say that in Venezuela as Marxists? Take Iran. The biggest anti-imperialist force in Western Asia is Iran. And Iran plays a pivotal role now in the struggle against imperialism. But it didn't come around just like that as an accident. It's rooted in a history of 1400 years of Shiism and Islam in general in that region. And when the Islamic Republic was established, it was anti-colonial, based on the Islamic philosophy and theories that Ayatollah Khomeini and his successor Khamenei have developed and exposed. Now, what do Marxists think of Iran? The Iranian Marxists organized an armed struggle against the Islamic Republic, leaving 17,000 people dead. They cooperating with the CIA. What is the Marxist position on Iran now? These are important questions. I think that we need to move towards a dialogue with activists and theoreticians from different backgrounds, with the same drive for social justice on how to build a new and better world. That's the purpose of this video on DTM and Marxism. And there are many socialists and progressive people that are taking interest in how the multipolar world is developing, which includes an interest in the political social system of the countries that are in the lead in this multipolar world. And this is China, Russia, and Iran. YouTube has many videos of Mohammad Marandi, who engage with progressive activists in global north. That's an example of how this dialogue between somebody from an Islamic Republic and people with progressive socialist background, secular background can communicate. And I hope that Prashad and his network can be convinced to join this dialogue on building a new world civilization and the role that Marxists can play in this regard. So we'll see how that goes. If you want to study my critique of liberalism and Marxism, go through the different chapters of the book and you will find plenty of material there. If you want to support the DTM channel, subscribe to it, share it with friends, families, and colleagues, and encourage them to subscribe. Get involved in discussion groups. And if you want to make a donation, look at sandoyuer.com how to do that. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you next time.